Hello everyone, welcome to Cashcroft TV. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. Thank you very much for watching and or listening to this episode of Ages of Empires, where we will be going through all the major world empires throughout history. In this episode we have two very important empires, the Danish Empire and the Swedish Empire. So this is a bit confusing here because for a period the Danish Empire also rules with or over, whichever you prefer, the Norwegian Empire as well. And as well, the Swedish Empire rules over the Danish and Norway empires as well during the calmer period. So this is quite difficult to parse out, so I hope you follow along as I endeavor to do so. Maybe we can see it as a bit of analogous to the Portuguese Empire and the Spanish Empire, where we have the Iberian Union, where they were both unified as well. So nonetheless, this is sort of one way of presenting it. So we have the Danish Empire and the Swedish Empire, also including particularly their colonial periods, which maybe in many parts makes them an empire. And as well, we will highlight a specific leader from each empire. So from the Danish Empire, we will highlight King Christian IV, and from the Swedish Empire, we will highlight Gustavus Adolphus. And at the end, we will have a comparison between the two in the style of Plutarch's Lives to perhaps distill their perhaps uniqueness through their differences and more about their respective empires. So we shall begin with the first empire. So the Danish Empire, which we shall follow the rise and fall of, or also known as the Danish colonies or the Dano-Norwegian colonies, were colonies that Denmark and Norway, and only Denmark after 1814 CE, possessed from 1536 until 1953, so quite a long period. At its apex, the colony spanned 4 continents, not like the colonies themselves, so plus Europe, but the colonies Africa, Asia, Europe, well, Asia, but other colonies within Europe, and North America, so spanning 4 colonies, or 4 continents, pardon me. So as for the early beginnings of this empire, so the foundations of the Danish colonial ambitions. So the origins of the Danish colonial ambitions can be traced back to the 17th century during the Age of Exploration, it is called. Denmark was a relatively small European nation, and still is to this day, and sought to expand its influence and wealth by establishing overseas colonies as other empires were doing in the region, or nations. Inspired by the success and wealth of European powers such as Spain and Portugal, the Netherlands and England, Denmark embarked on its own colonial ventures. So as for the establishment of its first colonies, so the Danish West Indies from 1671 to 1917, so these are colonies that they held for a very long period. So the Danish West Indies were among the earliest and most significant colonies in the Danish Empire. In 1671, Denmark established a presence in the Caribbean by acquiring the island of St. Thomas. The Danish West India Company, so there's also equivalents of for example, almost every empire has its East India Company nonetheless, or West India Company, but nonetheless this is the Danish West India Company, and it was responsible for the administration and economic exploitation of its colonies, particularly that Danish West India Colony. St. John was added in 1718, and St. Croix was purchased from France in 1733, expanding their territories in this region. These islands became integral to Denmark's colonial empire, primarily producing sugar, which was highly profitable at the time, and people still love sugar very much to this day, so you can see why it was very prosperous at the time. The labor force was largely composed of enslaved Africans, however, whose brutal exploitation underpinned the economic success of the colonies. But for example, there's something known as presentism. We can't necessarily apply today's standards to those times, but still, perhaps it was not ethical, whomever started it. It wasn't, however, these Danish-Norwegian states that started enslaving their African colonies, but nonetheless it was still certainly not an ethical thing, slavery. As for Greenland, which they started their colony in 1721, but which still remains to some extent a colony, or at least very much connected to Danish-Norwegian history. Denmark's colonization of Greenland began in 1721 when the Danish missionary Hans Egede established a mission in Greenland with the aim of converting the indigenous Inuit population to Christianity, so motivated by a religious purpose. The Danish government subsequently took formal control of Greenland, and the colony became an important source of fish and other marine resources, contributing to Denmark's economy. As for the expansion into Africa and Asia, the Danish Gold Coast region from 1750 to 1850, so in West Africa, Denmark established trading posts along the Gold Coast in present-day Ghana. So very significant country in Africa. These trading points into modern-day Ghana is the country. These trading posts, including forts in Christiansborg and Fredensborg, were integral to the transatlantic slave trade. So these places still retain these names today. This is a region I'd very much like to visit as well someday. Danish traders exported enslaved Africans to the Danish West Indies and other parts of the Caribbean, exchanging them for goods like sugar and rum. So these rum, even more, whether or not sugar is scientifically addictive, one can certainly say alcohol, the rum, is certainly addictive. As for Danish India, the Danish India region from 1620 to 1869, Denmark also ventured into India, establishing, so this is East India, so pardon me, we were speaking of the West India trading companies, now into the East India, establishing trading posts in Tranquebar, which is in modern-day Tharangambadi in India. I've been to India, but not this region. I'd like to visit it someday, perhaps. In 1620, and Skrampore near Calcutta in 1755 CE. These settlements were initially controlled by the Danish East India Trading Company. While the Danish presence in India was relatively minor compared to that of the British or French, it played a role in the broader network of European colonial trade in the region. So we shall also cover the French colonial empire as well. Technically, it could be considered the first and second colonial empires as well. As for but they did have a more significant presence in India, but that's not to say the Danish colonial empire did not as well. As for the challenges and decline, however, of this significant empire, so economic struggles and competition began. So the Danish colonial empire faced numerous challenges, including competition from the other colonial empire, other powers. Perhaps the reason they got into the endeavor to begin with, including competition for other European colonial powers. Denmark's relatively small population and limited resources made it difficult to sustain and expand its overseas territory. So its base was technically, geographically, in terms of many resources, was more deficient, leading to economic struggles. As for abolition of the slave trade and slavery, so therefore this is one of the reasons of many of the other declines of other colonial empires. So the abolitionist movement in Europe in the late 18th and early 19th centuries had a significant impact on Denmark's colonial empire. Denmark was the first European country to ban the transatlantic slave trade in 1792, so maybe whatever could be said of its morality. Historically, they were the first one to take the step forward to abolish slavery, so that is certainly a form of redemption. Slavery itself was abolished in the Danish West Indies in 1848. These developments reduced the profitability of the Caribbean colonies, however, contributing to their decline. So one of the reasons why they were able to extend so extensively was through the slave trade, which they themselves were the first to abolish, and many other colonies followed. Colonial empires followed, but perhaps if it weren't for the Danish-Norwegian empire, colonial empire, perhaps that would have not have happened. Or perhaps it was through necessity. Maybe it was inevitable. Maybe it was there would have been uprisings. As for the Napoleonic Wars and territorial losses, so the Napoleonic Wars from 1803 to 1815 further weakened Denmark's colonial empire. Denmark, initially neutral, was drawn into the conflict and suffered significant territorial losses in the Napoleonic Wars. The British captured the Danish fleet in 1807 and occupied the Danish West Indies during the war. The experience highlighted Denmark's vulnerability and limitations of its colonial ambitions. So, unfortunately, perhaps they were even perhaps picked the wrong side, perhaps in the Napoleonic War, or perhaps that was inevitable, as Tolstoy would say in the appendix at the end, or the epilogue, pardon me. The end of the colonial empire, therefore, seemed to come. So, the sale of the Danish West Indies in 1917. So, by the early 20th century, Denmark's colonial empire had diminished significantly. In 1917, actually quite not too long ago, Denmark sold, it's 2024 at the time of this recording, in 1917, Denmark sold the Danish West Indies to the United States for $25 million. So very, quite a low price for its ultimate economic value today. The islands were renamed the United States Virgin Islands. So the Virgin Islands were part of the Danish-Norwegian Empire. This sale marked the end of Denmark's significant overseas colonial holdings. As for Greenland and the Faroe Islands, so Greenland and the Faroe Islands remain part of the Kingdom of Denmark. In 1953, Greenland's status was changed from a colony to an integral part of the Danish realm, with representation in the Danish parliament, so being part of Denmark, essentially in terms of its parliament. The Faroe Islands also remained under Danish sovereignty, gaining home rule in 1948. As for the legacy and modern Denmark, so despite the decline of the colonial empire, Denmark had retained a unique legacy from its colonial past. Greenland and the Faroe Islands continues to be an integral part of the Kingdom of Denmark, with significant degrees of self-governance. The history of the Danish colonial empire is remembered for its contributions to global trade, cultural exchange, as well as the darker aspects of exploitation and transatlantic slave trade, but also being the first one to abolish it. In modern times, Denmark is known for its commitment to human rights, continuing this legacy perhaps, democracy and international cooperation. The lessons learned from the colonial past have influenced Denmark's approach to global issues, making it a prominent advocate for sustainable development and humanitarian aid. So perhaps quite a change or a dynamic history. So thus, the rise and fall of the Danish colonial empire reflect the broader pattern of European colonial expansion and decline. From its early ventures in the Caribbean, Africa, and Asia to the eventual sale of its colonies, Denmark's colonial history is marked by ambitious competition and adaptation to challenging global dynamics. While the empire has long since faded, its impact to shape Denmark's national identity and its influence on the Faroe Islands and Greenland to this day. National identity and its role influence the world today. It's a very, very fascinating empire, the Danish colonial empire, or also the Danish-Norwegian colonial empire for a time. Very significant, but perhaps even morally in its shift in terms of, and now it's seen by many to be a symbol of good human rights or good policy. So, as for the content of the slides, the title we have is Christian IV, who is King Christian IV, the notable leader we'll highlight. We must do the biography first, pardon me. So, Christian IV was born on the 12th of April 1577 and died on the 28th of February 1648. He was King of Denmark and Norway and Duke of the Holstein and Schleswig from 1588 until his death in 1648. His reign of 59 years and 330 days is the longest in Scandinavian history. It's a very, very long period. I myself have not lived that long. As for his early life and ascension to the throne, so his birth and family background. So Christian IV was born on April 12th, 1577. I believe that makes him an Aries, if you believe that. Those things. At Frederiksborg Castle in Denmark. He was son of King Frederick II of Denmark and Queen Sophie of Mecklenburg-Schwerin. As the eldest son, Christian was groomed from a young age to inherit the throne. So some of our leaders have came from the royal family, some have come from the royal family and not been the heir, necessarily the eldest or the heir to the throne, but this Christian IV seemed to have everything going for him in terms of likelihood of ruling his state, and therefore received the education they thought fitting for that. But that's not necessarily necessary. He received a comprehensive education, learning multiple languages, statecraft, military strategy, and sciences. As for becoming king, Christian IV ascended to the throne on August 29th, 1588, at a tender age of 11, following the death of his father. Due to his youth, a regency council governed until he was declared of age in 1596. So he became one of the reasons why he reigned for so long, as he was inherited the state when he was very young due to the death of his father, perhaps somewhat early in his life, or certainly early in his life. But nonetheless, there was a regency council sort of ruling over him, so maybe it's sort of humbling to not to maybe have the throne, but not necessarily have all the power. There's these older individuals who seem to govern over you. As for his reign and contributions, so is the expansion of the Danish colonial empire. So Christian IV's reign is considered one of the most significant in Danish history, especially in terms of colonial expansion and economic development as well. He was a visionary monarch with the ambitious plans to transform Denmark into a major European power. As for his establishment of trading companies, under Christian IV, Denmark established several trading companies to facilitate and expand overseas trade, such as the West India Trading Company. The Danish East India Company was founded in 1616 and it played a crucial role in establishing the Danish trading posts in India. So he established the East, but in the spirit of the West India Company, particularly in Tranquebar in India in 1620. This marked Denmark's entry into the lucrative spice trade and Asian commodities, colonial ventures, and the Americas as well. As for Christian IV was instrumental in expanding Danish influence in the Caribbean as well. The Danish West India Company was established in 1671, so he established the West India Company after the East India Company, although Christian himself did not live to see its founding. His policies and initiatives laid the groundwork for the colonization of the Virgin Islands, including St. Thomas in 1671, which still retains an influence from the Danish influence that he imprinted on it. St. John in 1718 and St. Croix in 1733. As for the African trade and the Gold Coast, so Christian IV also sought to expand Denmark's presence in West Africa. In 1750, the Danish Gold Coast was officially established with trading forts such as Christiansborg, which is in present-day Accra in Ghana, where forts were integral to the transatlantic slave trade, exchanging European goods for enslaved Africans who were transported to the Danish West India. So they're trading, as we mentioned, sugar and rum, for which are both, at least one of the two is addictive to get these slaves from Ghana particularly. But nonetheless, this is ultimately the decline of the Danish colonial empire was in some ways caused by stopping this. So perhaps he was very wrong to do this morally, but perhaps having not done this, the Danish colonial empire never would have extended to the heights it did. Christian is renowned for his extensive efforts to modernize Denmark's economy and infrastructure. He founded several new towns, including Christianshavn, which is now part of Copenhagen, Christiania now in Oslo, Norway, and Kristianstad, now Copenhagen, by commissioning numerous buildings, including the famous stock exchange, or the Borsen, and the round tower, the Ruddertarn. So there's very significant landmarks there that he created that are still there in these regions today. I've been to Stockholm, which is a beautiful, beautiful city. Military reforms and conflicts. So Christian IV was keen on strengthening Denmark's military capabilities. He invested heavily in the navy, as he saw the other powers were becoming powerful through that means, making it one of the most formidable in Europe at its time. However, his military ambitions led to several conflicts, including the Kalmar War, so the Kalmar Union we will discuss soon, which is with Sweden, in 1611 to 1613 against Sweden, and the 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648. Despite his efforts, Denmark faced significant challenges and losses from these wars. As for his personal life and character, his marriage and children, so Christian IV married Anne Catherine of Brandenburg in 1597, and they had 6 children, so quite significant, especially given the time perhaps. After Anne Catherine's death in 1612, he married Christian monk morganatically in 1615, with whom he had 12 children, so quite very, very prolific in child making, it seems. 18 children total. His personal life was marked by numerous affairs and extramarital relationships as well, so which caused scandals and tensions within the royal court. So not only producing 18 children, but also having many affairs on the side is really quite promiscuous, to put it mildly. As for his legacy and death, Christian IV's reign was a mix of remarkable achievements and notable failures. His efforts in colonial expansion and economic development had a lasting impact on Denmark, laying the foundation for future growth and influence. However, his military ventures drained the kingdom's resources and left Denmark in debt. Christian IV died on February 28 in 1648 at Rosenborg Castle in Copenhagen. He was succeeded by his son Frederick II. Despite the challenges and setbacks during his reign, Christian IV is remembered as one of Denmark's most dynamic and influential monarchs, whose vision and ambition shaped the Danish colonial empire and left an indelible mark on the nation's history. So thus, Christian IV's legacy is as perhaps the most significant ruler in the Danish colonial empire, or of the Danish colonial empire, is evident through his numerous contributions to Denmark's expansion, economic growth, and modernization. His visionary policies and relentless pursuit of making Denmark a major European power set the stage for the country's colonial ventures and its enduring influences on global trade and politics. Christian IV remains a towering figure in Danish history, celebrated for his ambitious spirit and transformative impact on the kingdom, but perhaps tarnished in some ways by, in many ways, strengthening the slave trade, for example, which sort of was in many ways led to his success, but ultimately the decline of the Danish colonial empire. So really quite manifested within even his own, just by studying his own life, we can really get a picture for the whole Danish colonial empire, as we covered before. So as for the content of the slide now, the title is Christian IV and the Danish Colonial Empire. It is known as the colonies of Denmark and Norway, and just Denmark after 1814, and they were possessed from 1536 to 1953. It's produced by the rise in the status and power of the Danes and Norwegians after the Kalmar Union, which was part of Sweden, as we shall see in the next part of this episode. As for the significant leader, we have Christian IV, King Christian IV, whom we highlighted. The empire was the Danish colonial empire. The period was from 1536 to 1953, when it was Denmark. That was the full Denmark period, and 1536 to 1814, which is a subset. That is the Norwegian period, CE, that's Common Era, also known as the Ages of Exploration and Colonialism. The modern locations included Denmark, Norway, the United States, Ghana, Ireland, Greenland, Germany, and Poland, the Caribbean. Million square kilometers was 3.0. Million square miles would be 1.16%. of the world would be 2.23. That's excluding Antarctica. So this is larger than our average empire, which is 1.14, and we only included the largest empires in the initial list. But nonetheless, they were coming from a region of perhaps more developed, and conquering regions, or creating colonies in regions that were not as economically developed as them. So perhaps maybe it's not necessarily would have been the same if it was 3 million square kilometers straight into France or Germany or another colonial empire. So, but nonetheless, it's still a very large region. Not necessarily the largest colonial empire we've had, but very large considering all empires of all time. Capital would be Copenhagen. The government was a constitutional monarchy. The and for periods also an absolute monarchy. The common languages was Danish was the official language, Norwegian, German, Icelandic, Greenlandic, and Faroese were also significant languages as well, and also perhaps traditional languages in Ghana, for example, and India as well. Religion would be evangelical Lutheranism. The population was in several millions, so it could be anywhere between 3 and maybe 15. It's very hard to get an accurate picture because also even the populations of the colonies, were they all necessarily ruled by them? Certainly were not, but nonetheless, that's several millions is the best broad estimate we can get. So let's say between 3 and 15. But it could have actually, maybe let's even expand it, 3 and 40. It's very difficult to estimate. As for just further information we have on the right, was the colonial empire was established in 1536 and disestablished in 1953. Currency was the riksdaler. That was preceded by the Old Kingdom of Norway and the Kalmar Union, as we shall highlight, with the Swedish Empire, colonial empire, and it was in conjunction with the Swedish colonial empire, and it was succeeded by the Kingdom of Denmark. As for images, we have the portrait of Christian IV by Peter Isaacs, produced in approximately 1612. To the right, we have the flag of the Danish colonial empire, and to the right, we have the coat of arms. To the right of that, we have an image of Danish soldiers returning to Copenhagen in 1849, showing certain pomp and circumstance, much like, for example, a Roman triumph after the first Schleswig War, and it was a painting by Otto Brack in 1894, and this was a period after the 3 Years' War, which was a three-year war between Germany and Denmark. Below that, we have the further down, we have the Slottsman Canal as seen from the Borsen building, and as well, it produced in circa 1900, and in the background so this is an image in Stockholm. We have, pardon me, in the bottom left here. So we have the Slottsman Canal we can see there, seen from the Borsen building, which is the bank building, the stock exchange building in 1900, and in the background from the left to right, we have the Church of the Holy Ghost, the Trinitas complex, the St. Nicholas Church, and the Holy Church. And above that, we have Fort Dansburg in Tranquebar, which was one of their Indian colonies, and it was built by Ove Gudjede in circa approximately 1658. And below at that, and to the bottom right, we have Reykjavik in 1835, which still remains part of the Danish Parliament. At the top right, we have a map of the Danish colonial empire. So there's Denmark's here. They have also Norway as well. It was completely unified for a period. Here we have Greenland, Iceland, and all the way. So North America here, the Caribbean, India, Africa, Ghana, for example. So very, very, very large region they ruled over. So as for the Swedish, we'll call it actually broadly the Swedish Empire, because we'll also talk about the Kalmar Union as well. So the rise and fall of the Swedish colonial empire, or Swedish Empire, or Kalmar Union as well, or the Swedish overseas colonies, consisted of overseas colonies controlled by Sweden. Sweden possessed overseas colonies from 1638 to 1663, and as well in 1733, and from 1784 to 1878. Sweden possessed 5 colonies, 4 of which were short-lived. These colonies spanned 3 continents, including Africa, Asia, and North America. So as for the early beginnings, starting with its motivations and early ventures. So the Swedish colonial empire, though smaller and shorter lived than those of other European powers, as we've highlighted, such as the Portuguese, the Danish, and Spanish as well, and French as well, was driven by a combination of economic ambitions compelled with other European nations, and a desire for greater international influence. Sweden's early attempts at colonial expansion began in the early 17th century under the rule of King Gustavus Adolphus, who we'll highlight in a specific biography, also sort of a founding figure of the empire, who sought to increase Sweden's wealth, or at least the colonial portion, and power through overseas ventures. As for the establishment of New Sweden, so New Sweden in North America began from 1638 to 1655. One of the earliest and most notable Swedish colonial efforts was the establishment of New Sweden in North America. In 1638, the Swedish South Company established settlement in the Delaware River in present-day Delaware, as well as in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. The colony's primary settlement was Fort Christiana, named after the reigning Queen Christina of Sweden. New Sweden attracted a mix of Swedish, Finnish, Dutch, and German settlers who engaged in fur trading with Native American tribes, now called bands often, at least in Canada. But this is in the United States, where they're often still called tribes. Despite its initial successes, New Sweden faced constant pressure from the Dutch colony of New Netherlands, located in the north. In 1655, Peter Stuyvesant, the Director General of the New Netherlands, led a military expedition that resulted in the capture of New Sweden. The colony was incorporated into New Netherlands, effectively ending the Swedish control in North America. So it's the Netherlands, the Dutch, who ultimately led to their decline, rather than the British or the French, who contended with each other often much more, or against each other much more than the Swedish did against them, at least in this region. As for the Caribbean and African ventures, such as St. Barthélemy in 1784 to 1878, so Sweden's most enduring colonial possession was the Caribbean island of St. Barthélemy. Sweden acquired the island from France in 1784 in exchange for the trading rights of Gothenburg. The island became a free port, attracting merchants from various nations and turning it into a thriving commercial hub. St. Barthélemy remained under Swedish control until 1878, when it was sold back to France due to its economic unviability and the burden of maintaining it. So perhaps they sold an asset, a discounted asset, but perhaps maybe France got it at a good deal because they were maybe not able to manage it sufficiently or properly. Or maybe it was inevitable, maybe it was just geographical, or maybe it was maybe the weather was bad during that period, but nonetheless they were not able to economize it properly. As for the Swedish Gold Coast in 1650 to 1663, so in West Africa, Sweden established several trading posts along the Gold Coast and in present-day Ghana as well. The most significant of these was Fort Christiansburg, established in 1652. These trading posts were primarily involved in the gold trade and later the transatlantic slave trade. However, Sweden's presence in the region was short-lived. In 1663, Denmark seized Fort Christiansburg, ending Sweden's control over the Gold Coast and the Baltic. As for its Baltic expansion and dominance, with the consolidation of the Baltic region, so Sweden's most significant territorial expansion occurred not overseas, but within the Baltic region. During the 17th century, under the leadership of Gustavus Adolphus and later Queen Christina, Sweden emerged as a major power in northern Europe. The country expanded its territories to include parts of modern-day Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Germany, and Russia. As for the Great Northern War, which took place from 1700 to 1721, so 21 years war, Sweden's dominance in the Baltic region faced a major challenge during the Great Northern War, it's called. A coalition of European powers led by Russia, the Denmark-Norway, as we notified were unified at the time, and Polish-Lithuania, which we've also called the Polish-Lithuanian Empire. The war lasted from 1700 to 1721 and ended with the Treaty of Nystad. Sweden lost significant territories, including Estonia, Latvia, Ingria, and parts of Finland, to Russian hands. This defeat marked the end of Sweden's status as a major European power and a significant decline in its territorial holdings, so a significant cause of its decline. But perhaps this war was inevitable, perhaps they had overexpanded in this region. As for later colonial ventures and decline, so as for Guadeloupe in 1813 to 1814, so during the Napoleonic Wars, Sweden temporarily controlled the Caribbean island known as Guadeloupe. In 1813, the island was ceded to Sweden, however, by the United Kingdom, as part of the Treaty of Stockholm, it's called. However, Swedish control was short-lived, and Guadeloupe was returned to France in 1814 following the defeat of Napoleon. As for the attempts in the Americas and Africa, so throughout the 19th century, Sweden made several unsuccessful attempts to establish colonies in the Americas and Africa. These efforts included plans to colonize parts of present-day Argentina and the purchase of the land in Liberia for Swedish immigrants. However, these ventures were either abandoned or failed to achieve significant success. So as for the end of the colonial empires, as for St. Bartholomew and its final decline. So by the late 19th century, Sweden's colonial ambitions had largely waned. The sale of St. Bartholomew to France in 1878 marked the end of Swedish colonial possessions. The focus shifted towards domestic development and modernization within the Scandinavian region. So now Sweden is by many considered to be hyper-focused on, for example, improving technology, for example, and efficiency, more maybe a micro-focus than an outwardly-looking focus. As for the legacy of modern Sweden, so while the Swedish colonial empire was relatively short-lived and limited in scope, it left a lasting impact on the region it touched. The legacy of the Swedish colonization can be seen in its cultural influences in regions like Delaware, Philadelphia, St. Bartholomew, or Pennsylvania, St. Bartholomew, and St. Bartholomew. Today, Sweden is known for its strong commitment to humanitarianism, democracy, and international cooperation, a stark contrast to its colonial past. So thus the rise and fall of the Swedish colonial empire reflect the broader trends of the European expansion and competition during the age of exploration and subsequent centuries. From its early ventures in North America and the Caribbean to its brief presence in West Africa, Sweden's colonial history is a testament to the country's ambitions and challenges it faced in maintaining its overseas territories. Despite its relatively modest colonial footprint, Sweden's efforts contributed to the complex tapestry of global history and continue to influence its national identity and international relations today. So very, very fascinating period of history, and I think, at least for me, I better understand the country, I believe, as I believe I do so in all of these empires we have covered. So as to highlight a specific leader, King Gustavus Adolphus, the most by many considered the most important ruler of the Swedish colonial empire. So Gustavus Adolphus, born on 9th of December, I think that is Capricorn. I think it's a Capricorn, I'm not certain. 1594, and died on the 6th of November. Also known as in English as Gustav II Adolf, or Gustav II Adolf. He was king of Sweden from 1611 to 1632, and is credited for 21 years, a long period, and is credited for the rise of Sweden as a great European power. In Swedish, Stormaktiden, it is called. During his reign, Sweden became one of the primary military forces in Europe during the 30 Years' War, helping determine the political and religious balance of power in Europe. He was formally and posthumously, after his death, given the name Gustavus Adolphus the Great. So we've had many individuals have this title, the Great, and Gustavus Adolphus is one to do so. Sometimes we include it in the title if it's necessarily, for example, most commonly written that way. This most common way of writing this leader's name is like this, Gustavus Adolphus, however, but he's still considered the Great by the Riksdag of the Estates in 1634. So he is, however, it's formally written down in the Riksdag of the Estates as Gustavus the Great, or Gustavus Adolphus the Great. So as for his early life and ascension to the throne, so with his birth and family background, so Gustavus Adolphus, also known as Gustav II Adolf, was born on December 9th, 1594, in the castle of Tre Kronor in Stockholm, Sweden. He was the eldest son of King Charles IX of Sweden and Queen Christina of the Holstein-Gottorp. He was raised in a politically turbulent environment where Gustav was educated in statecraft, languages, and military strategy from a young age, preparing himself for his future leadership. So, like perhaps many, but not all, of our most significant leaders, he did come from the most likely lineage, from essential heir to the throne, where some have come from the second or third in line, some have come from not even within the bloodline. As for becoming king, but he was, and he received the training they thought formidable or fitting for that. So as for becoming king, so Gustavus Adolphus ascended to the throne on October 30th, 1611, at the age of 16, so quite young, following the death of his father. So there was not necessarily a transition period as discussed in Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, where, for example, sometimes an emperor would transfer the next emperor before their death, which was seen as sort of a wise thing to do. Otherwise, a death is most likely unexpected, but also that gives the period to transfer the power and get used to it, and it's done consciously. His early reign was marked the efforts to stabilize the kingdom and address ongoing conflicts in neighboring countries, including Denmark, Russia, and Polish Lithuania. As for his reign and contributions, starting with his military reform and leadership, so Gustavus Adolphus is renowned for his military innovations and leadership, which transformed Sweden into a major European power. He reorganized the Swedish army, introducing new tactics, improved discipline, and innovative artillery. So quite a good military developer, at least. His reforms established mobility, flexibility, and integration of infantry, cavalry, and artillery into cohesive units, so even sort of manifesting modern Swedish spirit of micro-precision or improvement they implemented within their army, so maybe making the most of their resources, which might have been more limited to some of their threats, such as Russia, which had much more resources, at least. And he also combined infantry, cavalry, and artillery, so combining different forms of military weaponry or military tools. As for the Polish-Swedish War from 1600 to 1629, so Gustavus Adolphus played a crucial role in the long-running conflict with the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. We covered the Polish-Lithuanian Empire previously. The war saw several significant battles, including the Battle of Walhof in 1626, where Gustavus's tactics and leadership secured a decisive victory. The conflict ultimately ended with the Truce of Altmark in 1629, granting Sweden control over key Baltic territories and significant economic benefits. As for the 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648, so one of the most defining periods of Gustav Adolphus's reign was his involvement in the 30 Years' War, a very famous war in history, where Sweden entered the war in 1630, sitting with the Protestant states against the Catholic Habsburgs. So very significant distinctions of siding themselves with the Protestant, which still influences them today. Gustav Adolphus's leadership was instrumental in several key victories, including the Battle of Breitenfeld in 1631 and the Battle of Lutzen in 1632. His military prowess and strategic acumen earned him the title of Lion of the North. So we've had many titles the Great, but Lion of the North is perhaps a more unique name. And lion is a great animal, in my opinion. As for colonial ambitions, New Sweden in North Africa, as for New Sweden in North America. So during Gustav Adolphus's reign, Sweden established its first significant overseas colony, or New Sweden in North America. This colony was founded in 1638 along the Delaware River, which still bears some influence from the Swedish colonial empire, encompassing parts of present-day Delaware, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a state I feel very one of my favorite states. Delaware and New Jersey are also very beautiful too, but I have particular fondness for Pennsylvania. The settlement aimed to facilitate trade, particularly in fur, and strengthen Sweden's presence in the New World. Although Gustav Adolphus did not live to see its founding, the policies and vision laid the groundwork for Sweden's colonial endeavors. As for domestic policies and achievements, starting with economic and administrative reforms. So Gustav Adolphus adopted several domestic reforms to strengthen Sweden's economy and governance. He promoted trade, improved infrastructure, and established a more efficient administrative system. His reign saw the foundation of new towns and the expansion of existing ones, fostering economic growth and urban development. As for his education and culture, a patron of education and the arts, Gustavus Adolphus founded Uppsala University, which university still exists to this day, Uppsala University in 1624, providing significant financial support to enhance the status as a leading center of learning. He also encouraged cultural development, fostering an environment of intellectual and artistic growth within Sweden. As for his personal life and character, with his marriage and family, Gustav Adolphus married Maria Eleonora of Brandenburg in 1620. The couple had one daughter named Christina, who would later become Queen Christina of Sweden. Gustav's personal life was marked by a strong sense of duty and devotion to his family, though his reign was often consumed by military and political matters. As for his legacy and death, Gustav Adolphus's reign left an enduring legacy, significantly shaping Sweden's history and its role in Europe. His military reforms and strategic innovation influenced the development of modern warfare by combining, for example, cavalry, the army, and artillery, while his domestic policies laid the foundation for Sweden's economic and cultural growth. Furthermore, Gustav Adolphus died on November 6, 1632, at the Battle of Lutzen during the 30 Years' War, so died in combat. His death was a significant loss for Sweden, but his legacy continued through his policies and his reforms he instituted. He is remembered as one of Sweden's greatest monarchs, a visionary leader whose contributions elevated Sweden to a major European power. So very, very fascinating, turbulent life, ultimately dying in warfare, but expanding so significantly up until then, so taking perhaps too many risks to perhaps if it led that far. But maybe he never would have led that far if he did not take the risks in the first place, so perhaps it was a character. So thus, King Gustav Adolphus's importance as a ruler of the Swedish colonial empire and a transformative figure in Swedish history cannot be overstated. His military genius, visionary leadership, and commitment to strengthening Sweden's both at home and abroad left an indelible mark on the nation and broader European context. Gustav Adolphus remains a celebrated figure, emblematic of Sweden's rise to prominence in the early modern period. So very, very fascinating leader and fascinating empire as well, and we shall discuss a little bit more about the Union period as well, the Kalmar Union as well. So the title, the slide we have, Gustav Adolphus and the Swedish Colonial Empire. It was an empire spanning Europe, Africa, Asia, and North America. It was a European great power exercising much control over the Baltic in the 17th and 18th centuries, as well as colonial regions as well. So the significant leader we highlighted was Gustav Adolphus. The empire was Swedish Colonial Empire. The period, so the Kalmar Union, in which it ruled as well Denmark and Norway. So kind of like we had the Iberian Union, where Spain and Portugal were united. So this Kalmar Union, technically it was a Swedish crown. So this maybe could be considered even the pinnacle of the Swedish Empire more broadly. But we discuss more context around the Swedish Colonial Empire, however, because that's perhaps when it was larger. But the Kalmar Union, it was perhaps maybe a higher point because that was when they ruled over Denmark and Norway. Nonetheless, there's still a deep history between the relationship between the individuals I know from Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. It's sort of an interplay because they've ruled over each other for different periods, as we discussed. Nonetheless, the colonial period was also from 1560 to 1878 CE, known as the colonial period. So this covered the early modern age and the age of exploration and colonialism. The modern locations include Sweden, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Russia, Germany, Poland, United States, St. Bartholomew, St. Kitts and Nevis, and Ghana. Million square kilometers was 0.99, so almost 1, but a little bit smaller than our average largest empires, but still, it made the list of largest empires to begin with. Some empires we discussed so much, like Athens and Sparta, technically would not even have made the list, but we included them because of their great, perhaps takeaways we can derive from those two. and other Greek city-states. Million square kilometers would be 0.38, but of course this empire is much, much larger than those ever were. Percent of the world was 0.73, and from varying degrees we discussed the difficulty of different regions to rule, so perhaps they were more technologically advanced than some of the regions that they captured, perhaps in the Caribbean or maybe even the Americas, but or in Africa as well, but nonetheless they some of the regions they did battle against, for example, in the 30 Years' War, were also very developed as well. So this 0.99 million square kilometers or 0.38 million square miles is quite nuanced in terms of its difficulty to have conquered or to rule over. As for capital, was Stockholm. The government was an absolute monarchy and as well a constitutional monarchy during different periods. The common languages were Swedish was the official, as well Norwegian, Finnish, Estonian, Russian, German, and many other languages, indigenous languages or African languages as well. Religion would be the Church of Sweden, which is a form of Protestantism. It's actually considered one of the largest sects. It might even be the largest sect of Lutheranism, and as we can see, that 30 Years' War really manifested one of the reasons why it is still Protestant to this day. Population was in several millions. As for images, in the top left we have a portrait of Jacob Hofen, portrait 2 attributed to Jacob Hofennagel in 1624 of Gustavus Adolphus. To the right of that we have the flag of the Swedish colonial empire, and to the right of that we have the coat of arms of the Swedish colonial empire. To the right of that we have the motto, I Gud mitt hopp, which means in God my hope, and the anthem is the Kungsangen, which is the song of the king. To the right of that we have the seal of the Swedish governor of St. Bartholomew from 1784 to 1878. I thought it was important to include because it's kind of a representation of colonial power. The governor has this seal and therefore has power because he's connected to the Swedish colonial empire, although he may not even be from St. Bartholomew. As below that we have the panorama of Stockholm, circa 1868, as seen from a hot air balloon, which was so interesting. The technology we're starting to see at this point, and as we can see, it's a beautiful city then, as it is still to this day. Below that we have the Swedish image of the Swedish being invited by the Akan king of Futu to erect a stony house for the purposes of trade. So building houses as a form of trade, which is a fascinating way better than perhaps rum or such. As to the right of that we have some additional information. So the currency was the mark, the ortog, the Norwegian penning, and the Swedish penning. It was preceded by the Kingdom of Denmark, the Kingdom of Norway, and the Kingdom of Sweden, as we can see, because they were all united, for example, in the Kalmar Union, and it was succeeded by Denmark, Norway, as we covered, the Danish colonial empire, or the Danish-Norwegian colonial empire. It was also preceded by the Kingdom of Sweden after the colonial empire declined. Some additional information can also be considered in part of the late Middle Ages. The inception was the 17th of June, 1397. The Engelbrecht Rebellion was from 1434 to 1436, important period in its history. The Stockholm Bloodbath was in November of 1520. The Gustav Vasa was elected as King of Sweden 1523, and Denmark-Norway was established in 1523. Furthermore, the colonial period was established in 1638 and disestablished in 1878. So that historical area we're covering was the Kalmar Union, so that's some more background for that. And the establishment and disestablishment dates we have in the bottom right are the colonial period. In the top right, we have the map of the colonial empire. So we can see Ghana zoomed in here. We have the Caribbean, St. Bartholomew, as Delaware, for example, in Pennsylvania as well. The Delaware River as well, in New Jersey. All great, beautiful states as well. We have so Denmark as well. They ruled over for a period here, and even were invading into Russia. So very significant empire and period in history. And so, as for a comparison between the two leaders, King Christian IV of Denmark and King Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden. So as for their background and ascension, so King Christian IV of Denmark, he was born on April 12th of 1577 at Frederiksborg Castle in Denmark. His ascension to the throne is that he became king at 11 in 1588 after the death of his father, Frederick II. A regency council ruled over him until he came of age in 1596. As for his personal life, he is known for his colorful personal life, including 2 marriages and numerous affairs, so 18 children and having affairs on the sides with 2 wives, so very promiscuous, as we said, to say it mildly. As for King Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden, his birth and early life, he was born on December 9th, 1594 in Stockholm, Sweden. His ascension to the throne was at the age of 16, so slightly older, 1611, but both similar in that they were relatively young, following the death of his father, Charles IX. So both their fathers died, and they came to power somewhat young, with Christian IV being 4 years younger than before Gustav Adolphus became king. But they both had regency councils, but the regency council is a more prominent feature in Christian IV. So although maybe he had the throne earlier, having this longer period where there's this regency council ruling over him might have been maybe humbling or maybe tempting. Maybe that's why he was so promiscuous in his personal life. As for Gustav Adolphus's personal life, however, he married Maria Eleonora of Brandenburg and had 1 daughter, Christina, who succeeded him. So almost the entire opposite, but having only 1 child and 1 wife. The only thing next would be to have no children, no wife. But I think better to be married. Maybe he had been better if he had more children, but nonetheless, he did have 1 child, but very much different from Christian IV. Military achievements and innovations. King Christian IV, so his military campaigns involved numerous military conflicts, including the Kalmar War against Sweden and the 30 Years' War. The outcomes, he faced several defeats, including significant territorial losses during the 30 Years' War, which strained Denmark's resources. As for King Gustavus Adolphus, his military reforms, he is known for his military innovations, including the integration of artillery with infantry and cavalry, so uniting these 3 elements, which revolutionized warfare and maybe used optimized their resources. As for his 30 Years' War, he played a pivotal role in the Protestant victories, particularly in the Battle of Breitenfeld and the Battle of Lutzen, where he was killed in action in 1632, so siding with the Protestant side and also fighting to his death, which is perhaps maybe he overextended. As for their colonial ambitions, King Christian IV, his colonial ventures, he expanded Denmark's colonial presence, establishing the Danish West Indies, such as St. Thomas, St. John, and St. Croix, trading posts on the Gold Coast of Africa, and settlements in India, such as Tranquebar. As for his economic impact, his colonial projects had mixed success, with some profitable ventures but also significant economic challenges. As for King Gustavus Adolphus, his colonial adventures, he initiated Sweden's colonial efforts, leading to the establishment of New Sweden in North America in 1638. So maybe he was more of a starter, because Christian IV sort of was in some ways continuing his colonial empire, but he also created many trading companies, etc. So both of them were very much initiators of their colonial empires. As for Gustavus Adolphus's economic impact, although his reign laid the groundwork, the actual establishment and development of colonies happened after his death. So he was more laying the groundwork, whereas Christian IV was sort of more hitting the ground running. Furthermore, New Sweden was short-lived, failing to the Dutch in 1655. As for their domestic policies and achievements, so Christian IV's economic and urban development, he invested heavily in Denmark's infrastructure, and he supported arts and education, commissioning significant buildings like the Stock Exchange and the Round Tower, significant sites that still exist in that beautiful city today. As for King Gustav Adolphus, his economic and administrative reforms, he strengthened Sweden's economy through administrative reforms and encouraged trade, founding new towns with economic growth. As for education and culture, he formed the Uppsala University, famous university still there today, in 1624, enhancing Sweden's educational and cultural development. And as for their personal characteristics and legacy, Christian IV's personal traits, He was charismatic and ambitious, but also known for his volatile personal life and financial difficulties. So perhaps sort of nuanced character. He was in some ways loved. He was considered the great or the Lion of the North, but at the same time, his personal life, he was sort of at least not necessarily too good to his wives, perhaps, or maybe they did all love him. Maybe they loved too many loved him, or maybe he was wrong to them. As for, I do not think it's good to have many wives, but maybe it was also sort of form of presentism too. Maybe other monarchs were doing it as well, but nonetheless that does not justify it. But nonetheless he did have many children, and it's not certain whether, we don't know for certain to what extent they loved him or not. But nonetheless, Gustav Adolphus' life was very different. One wife and one child, and then died in death. Maybe if he had not died in battle, maybe he would have had more children, and maybe he would have had other wives too if he had not died in death, or maybe he would have had affairs on the side if he had not died in death. It's possible. As for their legacy, Gustav Adolphus is remembered as one of Sweden's greatest monarchs, transforming Sweden into a major European power through military prowess and effective governance. So both of them were very effective in military warfare, which makes them more similar than many other leaders. Both of them also were necessarily going to come to the throne. So thus, both Christian IV and Gustav Adolphus were ambitious rulers who sought to expand their respective countries' influence through military and colonial endeavors. Both invested heavily in domestic reforms and strengthened their nation's economies and infrastructures. Christian IV's reign, however, was marked by significant military defeats and economic challenges, while Gustav Adolphus is celebrated for his military innovations and successes. So despite Gustav Adolphus ultimately dying in war, he's generally considered more positively in terms of his military successes, which almost seems counterintuitive. Christian IV's colonial ventures had mixed results, whereas Gustav Adolphus' colonial initiatives, particularly in North America, were short-lived but laid the groundwork for future Swedish endeavors. So Christian IV also lived much longer. Not only did he not die in battle, he was the longest reigning Scandinavian ruler, but also coming to power very young. But also Gustav Adolphus came to power quite young. It's that he died in battle. So thus Christian IV and Gustav Adolphus played pivotal roles in their nation's history, or their respective colonial empires, each leaving a lasting impact on Denmark and Sweden, respectively. And we might also add influencing in Norway, and also the other regions they ruled over, all the colonial regions as well, throughout their distinct approaches to leadership, military strategy, and colonial ambition. So that is, in my opinion, very fascinating Danish Empire, the Danish-Norwegian Empire, and the Swedish Empire, the Swedish colonial empire, also the Kalmar Union, as well King Christian IV and King Gustav Adolphus. So thank you very much for watching this episode of Ages of Empires. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. I'd be very grateful if you continue to support. Thank you so much.